So you want to apply to the London School of Economics, but there are 1,000 questions running through your head. Am I even good enough? What grades and test scores do I need? How do I write a great personal statement? And how am I supposed to keep an overview over this freaking extensive website of LSE? And if that's not enough, you're competing with hundreds of other applicants on insanely low admissions rates. Last year, I've been in this position, and I know how overwhelming it can be to apply to a top university like LSE. So in this video, I want to go over the 6 most important factors in your graduate application and what I've learned about them. For those of you that don't know me yet, my name is Flo, and I'm currently studying the Masters in Economics and Management at LSE. This program has an acceptance rate below 5%, so I really hope that sharing my insights from my application will help at least some of you to better navigate your application process and stand out against other applicants. Let's get right into it. When it comes to the general application process at LSE, there are 2 things that stand out to me and for which I have some takeaways. The first one is graduate admissions are run on a rolling basis. That means that while you can usually apply as early as December, applications will usually be open until as late as May or even June. For example, I only applied in April last year, so it's super important that you just apply. Generally, the timing of your application will be much less of an issue than you might think. That being said, now we can get a little bit more strategic. Besides having rolling admissions, you might have noticed one more unique thing about graduate applications at LSE. You can apply to 2 programs. LSE will first consider your first choice, and if that application is unsuccessful, your second choice will be reviewed. What is important though, is that the admissions officers are not going to treat your application differently whether you only apply to 1 or to 2 programs. So there are only advantages to making use of that second choice. In fact, some of the people on my program only got into their second choice. And oftentimes at LSE, there are quite some overlapping master's programs, so it's definitely a win-win for you. For example, I put the master's in finance and economics as my second choice because it's honestly quite similar to the one I'm currently doing. Now that we have the most general things covered, your application consists of various components, or what I like to think of as little side quests that you must complete. And I will share my insights on each of them and how they play together to influence the outcome of your application from my experience. Let's start with the GRE. To be honest, when I first took the GMAT, I completely fumbled the bag, so I know how frustrating it can be to have to take these generalized tests. And that basically brought me to the question last year, how much do these tests actually matter? And I like to think of this in the following way. Your test scores and basically all other parts of your application as well can achieve one of 3 different functions. Either your test scores are going to be so low that they will be a deal breaker for your application. Of course, you should avoid this at all costs. Or your test scores will be so good, so high, that they will really be an asset on your application. You're really standing out against other applicants. Or, and this probably applies to most people, they will just be in between. Fine, good, okay. The middle ground. They will not be a deal breaker for your application, but they will also not be that magic key to the door of admissions. Now, because this middle ground is generally quite high actually for universities like LSE, for example, in my program, the average quantitative score on the GRE scale was 163, so that's definitely a very high score. And because of that, I would not recommend you to actually try to make this part of your application, the standardized tests, an asset. This is because studying for the GRE or the GMAT really takes a lot of time, and really trying to get into that upper 1%, 0.5% of test takers to make this an asset, that requires so much time that you should rather spend on other parts of your application where it is much easier to stand out against other applicants. So definitely aim for the benchmark of your course, and even if you're slightly below, that's fine. I think it's definitely feasible, for example, in my program to get in with a 160 quant score. The verbal scores, by the way, don't matter at all, so always remember, a good horse only jumps as high as it needs to. Now, your experiences are your experiences. If you're applying soon, you can't really change much more about that. That brings me to my first 2 quick notes about the CV. You should first of all definitely make sure that you really format your CV well. There's loads of resources out there, so I'm not going to go into that in depth right now, but make sure it's concise and simple and easy to understand. Second, you should present yourself in the best possible way. Now, of course, you shouldn't lie or anything, but the CV is not the place to be modest. Now, you might say, well, you're right, my experiences are my experiences, so how much do they actually matter? And I think this is a really important point about the CV. If you have tons of experiences, and by that I mean professional experiences, you did loads of internships, definitely put them all in there and make sure that you really leverage your experiences to stand out and potentially make your CV somewhat of an asset. However, generally I think making your CV an asset is quite difficult because it's still just a 1-page document ideally, and it's gonna be more difficult for you to stand out. And that also means that on the other hand, if you don't have that much experience, that's not really a deal breaker necessarily. I, for example, only interned at an advertising agency once, and then I had some more professional experience as a tutor for a very short period of time. And because LSE is very academically oriented, especially compared to other more traditional business schools, for example, it doesn't really matter. I didn't do 4 internships in consulting and 3 investment banking internships. I did none of that stuff, and I still got into an economics program. So my final takeaway for CVs would be this. Just really make sure that it's not going to be a deal breaker. And if you have less experience, that's fine, because you can always talk about that and interpret that and give a narrative to LSE in your personal statement. But before we go there, let's talk about one more crucial side quest, and that is grades. As part of your application, you will have to submit your undergraduate grades. And while this can be a whole administrative hassle on its own, trust me, let's focus on the important question. How much do your grades actually matter? And I would say quite a lot, with a caveat, however. My take is this. LSE is really academically oriented, so your grades are probably going to matter a lot more than your professional experience, for example. However, not all grades are equally important. While you still need to meet a certain benchmark for your overall GPA, I know from talking to my program director that specific grades hold different weights. It might seem obvious, but the importance of a grade in a course is highly correlated with how related that course is with the program that you are applying to. In my case, they looked specifically at microeconomics, econometrics, and math grades, because those are literally the subjects that are at the core of my current program. So if you have the luxury of still having most of your undergrad studies ahead of you, definitely make sure to choose electives that align with your masters of interest. I, for example, chose to do an extra math course during my undergrad because I knew it would be super useful for applying to an economics master's. And if you're not applying to an economics program, just look at your program outline and reverse engineer which courses are likely to be important. Then make sure that you perform particularly well in them so that your grades can be an asset on your application. Because ideally, you'll be studying and applying to something that already interests you, I hope. And that will make it 1,000 times easier to excel on your grades compared to a boring standardized test, for example. At least that was the case for me. The personal statement is where you can stand out. Because LSE is not holding any interviews, this is the only place where you can let LSE get to know you and tell an important story. And now listen carefully because this is crucial. Tell a story that answers why you belong to LSE. Don't talk about some intangible motivation or how you've always dreamt about going to LSE. This needs to be way more concrete. So here are 3 questions that you should definitely answer, in my opinion. First, why are you interested in the program that you are applying to? Now, you should answer this question both in a broader, more topical way. You could, for example, talk about the importance of economics currently from your perspective, so make sure it's not too generic. And then more importantly, you should answer this question concretely. So again, in my case, I applied to economics and management, and I had already studied a multidisciplinary program during my undergrad. So I made sure to really emphasize the overlap of these 2 programs and how I was interested in still studying multiple disciplines and using my knowledge that I had gained throughout my bachelor studies. At this point, you can also showcase your knowledge of the program you're applying to. So make sure you really know which courses you're going to take and tell them why you're interested in taking them and how you would be good at taking them. The second question to answer is, how would this program help you achieve your academic/career/professional goals? We're not in undergrad anymore, so it is really important that you state clearly how attending the program that you are applying to will benefit you in terms of your career goals. In my case, I talked about potentially being interested in going into academia and journalism. Those are two very different career avenues, and will I end up in either one of them? Probably not. But at the time of writing the statement, it made sense and it tied in well with my previous experiences that were on my CV. So don't worry too much if you don't have any super clear goals yet. It's fine if you're undecided, but make sure to at least tell LSE about some of your possibilities. And then there's the third important question. How would LSE benefit from you sitting in their classroom? And this is basically where you flex again, but not in a cringe way or anything. So make sure it's all very professional about your academic abilities, about your quantitative skills. For example, you can talk about your high grades in microeconomics, which I did. Or if you have a really great GRE score, feel free to do that. In the end, you need to convey that you both have the skills and the motivation and passion to really excel in the program that you're applying to. So as you can see, in the personal statement, it all really comes together, all these different side quests of your application. You should weave in the most important experiences that are on your CV as well, and really frame that narrative of why you belong to LSE. And of course, there's a bunch of formatting requirements that you should follow at all costs, but I'll link down below in the description where it's outlined by LSE directly. And now there's only one more thing. You need to nominate 2 referees that send reference letters to LSE. Although you don't write these letters yourself and they're somewhat out of your control, here are still 3 important takeaways. First, your references should ideally complement your grades. They should ideally be written by professors from subjects that are important to your program and in which you also did really well. Second, some professors are more likely to write you a recommendation or a grade recommendation if you performed really well in their subject. So make sure to really plan in advance. And that's also the third point already. Be structured, contact your professors on time, because as soon as you have nominated them, this process is kind of out of your control and you want to make sure that all of the documents are in order on time. So, what have I learned? It's not about a single side quest. Although the personal statement and your grades are probably 2 of the more important parts of your application, everything plays together. But if you only take away 1 or 2 things from this video, then it should be this. First, just apply. If you don't apply, you've already lost. And second, really focus on creating that narrative of why you belong to LSE. Some of the parts of your application will really just act as check marks for you, where you just try to hit that middle ground and not have them be a deal breaker. Whereas other parts really have the potential for you to make them an asset and really stand out. But that really depends on who you are as an applicant. Nothing is set in stone, and while for me the GRE, for example, was not an asset, it might be for you. I would like to mention another caveat. This is all based on my personal experiences. And while I've talked to other successful applicants, what I've done and what they've done may not apply to you. Applications really vary across departments, for example, and there are also probably a lot of unobserved influences that can't really be identified. More than that, my application is of course not perfect, and it is hard to tell if I got accepted because of something I did or in spite of it. So be cautious about that. I also put some links that I personally found useful during my application down below in the video description. They will provide you with some more general guidance from LSE. So if you found this video helpful, I'd really appreciate you leaving a like and a subscription. It would really help me out. And I'm planning on making some more videos about LSE in the future, so feel free to let me know about anything you'd be interested in the comments. That's it, I guess. So, bye. So this is basically the coolest thing that you get at LSE. A coffee cup. It is quite cool though. And it's reusable, so that's really good.